Let's set the scene. It's October 1942. We're in a lonely stretch of Egyptian desert near a tiny railway stop called El Alamein. And right here, the entire fate of the Second World War is hanging by a thread. This is the story of a duel between two legendary commanders in the sand that would literally change the course of history.
Now, this wasn't just another battle. No way. The Allied victory here at the Second Battle of El Alamein was a massive turning point. It was really the first major offensive victory against the Axis forces. As Winston Churchill famously put it, this wasn't the end, but it was, perhaps, the end of the beginning.
So how did we get to this point? Well, by late 1942, things were looking pretty grim. The Axis forces had pushed deep into Egypt. They were threatening to capture the Suez Canal and get their hands on the huge oil fields of the Middle East. Everything was on the line. And at the very heart of this whole conflict was a clash of titans, a real duel between two very different commanders. You had Erwin Rommel, the legendary desert fox known for his brilliant, daring, off-the-cuff tactics, and facing him, the brand new guy, Bernard Montgomery, cautious, methodical, a planner who is absolutely determined to just grind his opponent into dust. This was personal.
You really can't overstate how high the stakes were here. If the Axis took the Suez Canal, they'd choke off a vital Allied supply line to the east. Those oil fields, they were the lifeblood for the entire war machine. But maybe the most important thing on the line was morale. After a long string of brutal defeats, the Allies desperately needed a win.
So both sides knew this was it. The big one was coming. But winning this thing wasn't just going to be about who had more guns or tanks. It was about strategy. And as it turns out, Montgomery had a few incredible tricks up his sleeve. I mean, just look at the numbers. On paper, the Allies had a huge advantage. Montgomery had nearly twice as many men and tanks. His whole plan was to use this overwhelming force to just methodically crush the German-Italian army. Rommel, on the other hand, was short on pretty much everything, but especially fuel.
So, Rommel knew he couldn't win a freewheeling battle out in the open. So what did he do? He turned the desert itself into a massive death trap. He created what the soldiers called the Devil's Gardens, these huge, deep belts of mines and booby traps, all designed to channel the Allied tanks right into his kill zones. And the scale of this is just mind-boggling. We're talking about 500,000 mines laid out there in the sand. Most of them were powerful anti-tank mines. And get this, some were actually British mines that the Axis had captured earlier. This was the deadly maze that Montgomery's men were about to walk into.
So Rommel's plan was pretty straightforward. He split his armored divisions, holding them in reserve in the north and the south. He figured he'd just wait for the Allies to attack, see where they were concentrating their forces, and then rush his panzers in for a devastating counterattack, destroying them inside his fortified zones.
Montgomery's plan, though, was the total opposite. It was methodical, it was relentless. He saw it as a 12-day battle in 3 simple phases. First, the break-in, where infantry punch holes in the minefields. Second, the dogfight, a brutal grinding match to wear down Rommel's armor. And finally, the final breaking, where they'd bust through and destroy the enemy.
But here's the thing. Montgomery wasn't just relying on brute force. Oh no. Before a single shot was fired, he planned one of the most incredible, elaborate deceptions of the entire war.
It was called Operation Bertram, and it was a masterclass. The Allies built fake supply dumps out of junk, then secretly replaced them with real supplies overnight. They built a totally fake water pipeline to make it look like the attack was coming way later and much further south. And the best part? They disguised their real tanks in the north to look like simple trucks, while putting a bunch of fake plywood tanks out in the south. The Axis fell for it, hook, line, and sinker.
Okay, so the trap is set. The moment has finally arrived. Under the light of a full moon on the night of October 23rd, the desert was about to absolutely explode.
The battle didn't start with a whistle or a charge. It started with a sound, a deafening, earth-shaking roar as nearly 1,000 Allied artillery guns all opened fire at the exact same instant.
Just stop and think about that level of coordination for a second. For 5.5 hours, those guns fired over 500,000 shells. It was a perfectly orchestrated storm of steel, just pounding the Axis defenses.
So, this first phase of the attack had a code name, Lightfoot. And the name was quite literal. The idea was that the infantry soldiers were light enough to walk right over the anti-tank mines without setting them off. This let them advance and secure ground while the engineers scrambled to clear safe paths for the tanks to follow.
But this was hell on earth. The engineers had to clear paths through 5 miles of the Devil's Gardens, and they were under intense, constant fire the entire time. It was a far deadlier and more difficult job than anyone had anticipated.
And right away, the plan started to hit snags. The tanks kicked up so much dust that visibility dropped to basically zero. In all the confusion, these massive traffic jams formed in the narrow lanes the engineers had cleared. The armored columns just got hopelessly stuck in the minefields.
From the Axis side, it was just pure chaos. Their communications completely broke down. Panic reports were flying everywhere. One Italian unit simply sent the message, "Everything is lost." That pretty much captures the terror and the absolute confusion of that first night.
And as if things weren't bad enough for the Axis, a leadership crisis erupted. General Stumm, who was just filling in for Rommel while he was on sick leave, died of a heart attack in the first few hours of the battle. Rommel had to rush back from Germany, and he didn't arrive until 2 days later, only to find his army was already a complete and utter mess.
So, despite all those initial setbacks, the Allied attack was now in full swing. Rommel had just arrived to find total chaos, and Montgomery was about to kick off the second phase of his plan, the dogfight.
And what came next was that dogfight, a brutal 12-day battle of pure attrition. This wasn't about clever maneuvers anymore. This was a meat grinder. For almost 2 weeks, Montgomery just relentlessly hammered the Axis defenses, launching attack after attack. He knew Rommel was running out of fuel, running out of tanks, running out of men. Every Axis tank they destroyed couldn't be replaced, and Montgomery was willing to trade losses to just bleed his enemy dry.
And the victory was absolutely decisive. El Alamein completely ended the Axis threat to Egypt in the Middle East for good. It gave Allied morale an incredible boost. And critically, it happened at the same time as the American landings in Northwest Africa, Operation Torch. This basically trapped the remaining Axis forces and marked the beginning of their final retreat from the entire continent.
So this leaves us with a really fascinating question, right? Was this duel in the desert won simply because Montgomery had an overwhelming advantage in men and machines? Or was it that masterful, clever web of lies in Operation Bertram that threw Rommel completely off balance? Maybe the real answer is you just can't have one without the other.